Thank you for joining us. My name is Paige Motes. I'm the Senior Managing Director for Global Ethics and Compliance at Dell. I specialize in a few different areas, but for this particular discussion, my organization focuses on strategic programs, really initiatives that add value to the business, with being our specialty area. Herb and Rochelle from Microsoft are going to introduce themselves as we have their sections of the discussion. But really what we're here to do today is talk about kind of training and awareness being built in a different way using neuroscience and using kind of competency-based engagement, kind of trying to go back to how people think and how people work and how people engage, and helping that fuel how you develop programs and initiatives from a proactive standpoint. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Herb.
Thanks, Paige.
You got it.
So I'm Herb Wilges from Microsoft. I work in our Office of Legal Compliance. Like Paige, I do a lot of things across our program, but really enjoy focusing on training for this session because it's such an interesting topic. I think any discussion of training has to start with the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, who was a German scientist, and what his research shows, and keep in mind this research was done before we turned over our brains to smartphones. This was back when people actually wrote stuff down and remembered things. But basically the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve says that as I'm talking right now, a fairly decent percentage of you are forgetting what I'm saying, like as I'm talking. And that may be me, but there's also science that it could be anyone. And that when you leave this room, you will have forgotten quite a bit, and then in a month's time, you will have forgotten almost all of it. So when we think about, as compliance professionals, how do we train people? You're basically setting yourself up to do something that will be forgotten. And so how do you get over this forgetting curve? Well, I mean, one approach is you just don't worry about it, right? It's just a check the box function. You do your PowerPoint, your online training, and call it a day, and don't really worry about whether you're effective or not. But I think for most of us, we want to be effective. And what the science shows is that reinforcement is really important. The science also shows that we call it sort of just-in-time training or right-time training, which is all about trying to deliver training in the moment an employee is engaged in the risk activity that you want to prevent them from making a bad decision. So an employee is getting ready to offer a trip to a government official to travel somewhere. You want to give them a little micro burst of training at that moment in the tool or whatever your process is, rather than have them search back in time for the Q1 training on anti-corruption, which of course we know they've forgotten. But I think another approach to this issue is to really think about human behavior, which, compliance is really about how can you predict what people are going to do and prevent harmful decisions. And so we developed a training that I just want to share a little bit about with you, where we kind of looked at a lot of the corporate scandals that were going on, and our chief compliance officer's comment about a lot of them was, where were the lawyers in this situation, and where were the finance people, and where were the HR people? Because a lot of these scandals, you have lawyers drafting severance agreements, you have HR managing separations, you have finance people, looking at the numbers, and no one puts the whole picture together. And so we decided to develop this training around integrity as a skill, as opposed to a value. Most lawyers, I think, and most people in control functions and companies think they have high integrity, and most people do. But the reality is that sometimes people don't practice integrity. So I thought we'd start off with a little video. This is a famous experiment, the Ash-Solomon experiment. I don't know if many of you have seen this or not, but it took place in the 60s, so everyone looks like a little bit of a hippie, long hair and beards. And what they're going to do is they're going to bring a group of people into a room, and there's going to be one guy who's the test subject. He doesn't know he's the test subject. And everyone in the room is going to give a wrong answer to a series of questions, and they're going to assess whether this guy conforms to that wrong answer or not.
The Ash experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the succession of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example,
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gets the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1, 1, 1. 2,
1.
3. 3.
The action experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen as rock the boat, so we will go along with the group. Even if we don't believe what people are saying, we still go along. 1, 1, 1.
So, you know, he held out for 1 round, and then he gave up in the second. I mean, and to me, this is like ethics and compliance right here. I mean, this is the entire ball game when it comes to how people act. Because, you know, companies can have a great culture, and oftentimes, though, that's an HQ culture. And you go out in the field, and subsidiaries have their own cultures. And this idea of conformity, you know, I think we kind of associate conformity with perhaps being a negative quality, but actually, as the scientist said, our brains are wired to conform, because when we were out on the plains as Neanderthals, if you weren't in a group, you were going to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. And so conformity is essential to survival. And there's these very interesting studies that show if you if you exclude someone from a group, the part of their brain that lights up is actually a part of the brain that shows physical pain. It can actually be cured with Tylenol, for example, in some of these experiments. So we partnered with this company called the Neuroscience Learning Institute, and we created a workshop. It's a 3-hour workshop, and we take our leaders through it, particularly in the field. We take our control functions through it. And we basically tell them, you know, we sort of identified 3 challenges to acting with integrity, even if you have integrity as a value. You know, the first one is an issue of capacity, just how much information your brain can handle. The second one is about unconscious bias, and we sort of, you know, there's a lot of unconscious biases, and we tried to identify the ones that were most particular to failing to act with integrity. And the last one was just sort of having the courage to act, which is about psychological safety and the idea of being on a safe team, which again, you know, plays into the conformity. And so, you know, we show our leaders this video, and we have some great discussions about how their actions and their culture, you know, impact conformity in their groups and the inability of people to break out of certain patterns that could be, you know, harmful to the company. We always start with this video. You may have seen this. If you have, don't give it away. But basically, I'd like you all to count the number of times one team passes the ball to the other, and we'll see who has the highest correct answers.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white take? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
So one of the things we talk about in this workshop is we asked, these our employees to talk about, when are the times you miss the moonwalking bear? And as you heard this morning, if someone's getting 400 emails a day, I don't get 400 emails a day. That seems like an extraordinarily large number, but perhaps many of you do. It's pretty hard to just take in all that information. Sometimes you miss the big picture, which is what we think happens in a lot of corporate scandals. And so, we go through the PFC, the prefrontal cortex. It's actually it's just this part on the forehead right here, and it's the size of an index card. And that's all your brain has for capacity. I mean, that's it. So it can get overwhelmed very easily. So we talk a lot about strategies to deal with, these capacity issues. And then we also talk about, sorry, the slide's a little cut off there. We also talk about some of these unconscious biases that people have, both the positive aspects and the negative aspects, the tendency not to think long term, the tendency to rely on people like you in making decisions. And we have really good discussions about, strategies to overcome these biases. And one of the tools we use is something called an if-then plan, which many of you may be familiar with. But the idea is to really plan for these situations. So we develop these statements with the people in the workshop, and some really interesting things come out. We had one of our most senior lawyers in the field, talking about the pressure of Q4 when he's got a lot of deals coming across his desk to review, and he came up with an if-then plan to call up his colleague in another subsidiary altogether to go look at some of his deals, and they would switch deals just so they wouldn't be impacted by the in-group of their subsidiary. So example of a very simple if-then statement. So that's sort of a preview of our integrity skills training, and it's been a great experiment because, like most workshops, you get a lot of good discussion going. And we found people are using their if-then statements. The science, I think, has been interesting to people. We do a lot more of it in our 3 hours. And then we conclude it with a discussion about safe teams. Google did a study called Project Aristotle where they studied, they spent 3 years studying what makes an effective team. And they is it A players, is it B players, is it this kind of team, is it that kind of team? What they came up with after 3 years of studying their teams was that it was really about psychological safety. The people felt free to speak up and differ with the opinions of others and feel safe doing that. So we discuss a lot of that, and that leads to kind of our speaking up part of the workshop. So I'm going to turn over to Paige, but I just thought I'd just pause for a second and ask if you have any questions about this or any reaction to it. Yes?
Did you develop this training in-house, or did you partner with Neuroscience Learning Institute? I mean, how was the dynamics?
Right. So the question is how we developed the training. We partnered with the Neuroscience Learning Institute. They sort of brought the science, and then we took the learnings from the science and sort of shoehorned it into our values and the way we approach compliance. We have a thing called Pause, Think, Ask, which is kind of our framework for ethical decision making. So we put those things into our framework, and it's been a good partnership. Yes.
If, as you do this integrity skills training, if you're worried or there's behavioral science that says that people forget things, why wouldn't they forget that workshop training? Is it,
Right.
How often is it given and kind of incorporated in business people's everyday dealings?
Yeah. So it's a good question. The question is, how do you overcome the forgetting curve with this workshop? And we really rely on the if-then statements. We actually go back to participants and ask them if they're using them. We tend to find that people like showing the videos to other people, so that has some viral quality to it. And it's a relatively new program, so we haven't gone back and done it again. But we do it with all our new leaders, and so far I would say it's been pretty sticky. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's a 3-hour workshop for leaders. My question is how have you designed it with levels, and or how do you define a leader? Is it like international managers, people who have their reports,
Yeah, the question is, how do we do it and get that amount of time? We start out with our senior leaders because that, they start the tone. And by senior leaders, it's really the actual, reports to the CEO leaders of the company. And then we sort of have their teams there. But sometimes we'll go into subsidiary and do the entire subsidiary if it's a small one, or we'll do the entire, HR or legal function of a subsidiary. And getting the 3 hours is, was easier than I thought. And I think Paige will have some good insights on this. I find when you roll out lousy training, it really impacts your credibility as a department and people don't want to take it. But if you take the time to put something good together, then people actually want to spend more time on it. I'd say the one area where we didn't do a good enough job initially is, one reaction we got is, hey, this is all really interesting, but how does this apply to me? And so we started developing scenarios, so for the people working on AI, we developed an AI scenario. For the salespeople, we developed sales scenarios. And so that was helpful to us in kind of helping them apply the lessons learned. Yeah.
You said it's been sticky. How are you measuring?
We do the kind of standard measurements around user satisfaction and relevancy index score, which is more of a survey-based approach. We also look at, we have a place where people actually post their if-then plans and talk about them and share them. We kind of look at that. Are people actually, interacting over this? And of course, we track our escalation data after we go in and see if that made a difference. Those are our basic measurements. And then of course, we have all the word of mouth stuff, but that doesn't really hold up in a measurement way. So Paige, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Grab that from you. So, I think it's interesting what Herb talked about, a 3-hour workshop. Dell actually has been experimenting in that area as well, and what we found is it is actually more sticky. Not to put down the online training and other small snippets of awareness, we do that too, but we like to see things in a spectrum. And so one of the things that we started to do when we think about kind of rethinking awareness is that we did a lot of engagement with key stakeholders for the target audiences we were trying to target. So as an example, we have 60,000 plus salespeople in our company. They are our highest risk. Actually, take that back, marketing has become now our most highest risk because they get to the customer before the salesperson does, but that's a separate session. But from the sales standpoint, they have a very sophisticated learning and development team, a very sophisticated sales operations team. And what we had found, and many of you may have done the same, is that we've been creating programs that we're just trying to get in the door. Well, we completely flipped the model, and we went to the sales learning and development team, we went to sales leadership, and we said, what if we, together with you, co-created a program that was cohort-based, so about 40 people or less in a meeting. It's going to take a long time to get through everybody we want to get through, and we'll prioritize what we want to do. But what if we give you credit for the online training? You don't have to also take the online training if you go through this, because the stickiness of engaging and having these kinds of videos and scenarios and discussions, actually they walk away with a lot more knowledge, and that kind of forgetfulness is less so, we find, than even the online training or even small snippets. So what we did is we actually did a lot of research with the sales learning and development team and a third-party consulting firm they use to talk about sales skills. So we're not talking product, we're talking sales cycle and effective selling strategies. So if you're a salesperson, you think about the total sales cycle. You actually think about everything from prospecting to solution development to the RFP or the proposal stage to the contracting stage and then the account management cycle. If you think about not only integrity, which must be a red thread through the whole process, but key risks. So gifts and hospitality in the entertaining prospecting phase, right? Or the maintaining of an account phase. Maybe you're worried about trade compliance when you're actually doing the deal and you hope that the Dell system doesn't end up in Iran, right? Or you've got channel partner, third-party reseller risk with another aspect of the cycle. So what we did is we co-developed something with the sales organization that put all of the risks and the values in context of every single aspect of the job they do. But we didn't stop there. We actually forced the facilitators to co-facilitate. So an ethics and compliance or legal facilitator must co-facilitate with a business sales leader. We could not walk in the door by ourselves. We had to be walked in the door side by side. And we had to go through a certification process where we were as good facilitators as the sales facilitators were. And their bar was set very high. In fact, a few of our legal people almost cried when we failed them in the first round. They thought, we're the best presenters on the planet. We know anti-corruption like the back of our hand. And we're like, yeah, well, you stink at talking about anti-corruption to a salesperson. So it was really a great exercise in, humility, as well as really understanding the mindset of a salesperson. So one of the things that we talked about out of the gate was, how do you frame something like this? So this not only helped us frame, and I know there's some small print on there, but I'll just give you a sense. We framed this kind of concept, not just the training, but ethics and compliance entirely, as meeting customer expectations. If we did not immediately out of the gate identify with the salesperson that the customers care about this stuff and why they care, and even putting big logos, some of your companies are our biggest customers. We put big logos up on a screen and showed their values and press releases of the things that you guys are out there doing. Man, a salesperson goes, that's my client. I've never even talked to them about that before. Well, you should, right? So those kinds of concepts really caught their attention. And then we talked about the implications to our company strategy, our maintaining our competitive brand, and then taking smart risk, which is a big thing that we're talking about as a company, which is we have to take risk. We cannot survive as an entity without taking risk. What does smart risk mean? And how can we say yes to get to the right answer with the customer, but say yes, leveraging our values and all of our expectations for being a company with integrity? But the other thing we did is we talked about how companies make decisions to buy because people are making those decisions to buy. I may be buying something on behalf of Dell, but I assure you it's Page Moats with a lot of my own decision-making values criteria coming into that decision. I have my own personal career path I'm thinking about. Is this gonna help me get to the next level? I've got, if I make a decision on the wrong vendor and something goes wrong, do I lose my job? How is this going to propel the organization to do even better? People make decisions in the buying experience kind of using an emotional lens without even knowing that. But salespeople that are taught well are taught to tap into that in their sales cycle. So why not tap into that concept when you're teaching ethics and compliance? Because if you're tapping into a value structure when you're trying to sell, how hard is it to apply Dell's values? Let me talk to you about what our company's values are. I've read yours are A, B, and C. How does that work with your success of what you're trying to buy? When you make those connections for a salesperson, not only are they going to better understand the risk that you're trying to mitigate, but they're actually going to start talking about that stuff in a sales cycle. And when salespeople talk about this stuff in a sales cycle, it sticks. So we really reinforced, and this is actually a slide we did not develop. That's from a salesperson's sales training. Notice the word ethics and compliance aren't on there because we're using their own content in a different way. The other thing that we did is we talked about mental models. We don't teach mental models. Our salespeople get taught about mental models, about how they think about decisions in the sales process. How do they get up above thinking about the really myopic aspect of the deal that they're on, and they think about the whole strategy. What's the big picture? This concept is taught in Dell Sales University outside of the ethics and compliance space, but it shouldn't be, right? So if I'm a leader and I'm having an issue, how do I get up above that issue and understand how it might affect the broader organization or the customer or our reputation? So you can see how we took existing sales content, put it together with an ethics and compliance bent in a 3 to 4 hour workshop that was really interactive with videos and things like that. And what we ended up doing is we measured it against how they measure everything else they get trained on in sales. And we use an NPS concept at Dell. We got a 96%. The next highest sales training is a 94. Yes. So the business, we did a pilot in one of our remote areas in Latin America to start off because it was a place where we didn't have a lot of finance and HR and legal kind of present. They loved it. They became our advocates, and then we got the business to fund the rest of it. Funding meaning translations of the training, making sure that we had the certification with a third party if somebody needed to travel. Ethics and compliance and legal didn't pay a dime. We actually went to Michael Dell's directs that were in charge of those business units, and they paid. So it's kind of nice. And then I'll just do one little quick thing, because I want to make sure I give Rochelle plenty of time, and that is on the opposite end of the spectrum. So I talked about kind of workshop, 3-4 hour, really sticky, specific to the target audience, co-developed. And then the opposite spectrum, which is rethinking things, is small snippets, not even called training. Don't you dare call it training. It's continuous learning, because everybody likes to improve and get better and learn more. Dell actually implemented something through the HR organization for the company that kind of is like a LinkedIn learning aggregator concept, right? We can pull in TED Talks, we can pull in an infograph, a press article, whatever you want. And it allows me, in fact, if I show you the next page, I said, this are the kinds of things I want to learn about, and here are the things that can get automatically pulled in. And it pulls from the internet, it pulls from all kinds of places. Well, we also pre-negotiated that we could actually push some stuff as long as what we push doesn't feel like it's ethics and compliance pushing training. So we had to say, I'm a salesperson in Korea. There's unique new rules around gifts and hospitality thresholds in Korea. We have a one-pager in Korean, gonna push it to you. So when you're learning about XYZ, that pops up too. There's a new French law in anti-corruption, pushing it to that group. Soon, towards the end of the year, there'll be a new California privacy law. We're gonna push that. So you can see how we're taking awareness, not training. It could be anything. We're pushing it to this kind of platform that everybody in the company is gonna use. It doesn't feel like I'm being pushed training. It's not even being mandatory, but it engenders that continual learning concept. So this just started, more to come on that, but I at least wanted to show you, when you think about all the spectrum of things you're out there probably doing, these are kind of our bookends of spectrum. And we've done everything in between, but I just want to show you that. And I want to give her lots of time, but I can take probably 3 questions. Yeah?
How are you doing that? The CCPA and the other stuff, how are you said it's not required, so you're learning that?
Right, so we are also doing required training and things like that where it makes sense. But what we find is, those place and time annual compliance training periods, are easy to forget, right? We got to take them. Dell ties it to bonus. I don't get my money if I don't take it. It feels very check the box for even us, right? So this we are pushing. We create the content, or it's aggregated from the internet. We might find a great TED Talk that we don't even worry about, right? That can push. And it's pushed through this online platform that's also mobile enabled. So it can alert me something new is in my thing. Now, I don't have to go take it, but if I'm making it meaningful enough to the work that they do, then that actually helps the take rate. We're starting to see real progress, but I think in a year from now, we'll have some real usage numbers to go off of. Yes, sir.
My question was, how do you drive people to the content, and then what's the uptake?
So you can't really drive people to the content, because this is kind of a I go when I want to thing. But I think that's what we love about it, which is it allows us to pepper concepts throughout the year, that it doesn't feel forcible, because often ethics and compliance feels like, oh, those are those people that make me go do X, Y, and Z, right? But again, we try not to brand it as ethics and compliance. We try to work with the sales, learning, and development team or the HR team or others to understand what their potential type, the best kinds of paths that they seem to be asking for, so we can get data that says that these kinds of people are seeming to learn and like X, Y, and Z topic, and we can find interesting ways to plug ours in. But it is new, so it's experimental right now, but I have a feeling we're gonna see some real progress.
Just to follow on from that, are you measuring the hits then? So if you're
Yes.
pushing the content out,
We are measuring hits. We're measuring hits. We're measuring if they take that topic and then they say, I like that topic, I want to search for a fringe topic. We're seeing what searches happen right after that. There's also the ability at the end of taking one of those little pieces, you can rate it 1 to 5, super easy, just like you rate a restaurant, click, and we're getting some quick feedback on whether or not it's a helpful experience. All right, push it over to Rochelle.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to talk primarily about Microsoft Standards of Business Conduct. And let me start by just saying a lot of our thinking with first, our Standards of Business Conduct, our course, is an annual course that employees are required to take. Many of you probably have the same thing. When we started taking a look at it and thinking about training in particular for our shift, we wanted to make sure we're focusing on the learner. So instead of thinking solely about what we want to get out, what can somebody learn? And we think about the Standards of Business Conduct for Microsoft. This is a course that's taken by 130,000 employees globally and our board of directors. And so how can you make something that applies to everyone? So first of all, we focused our Standards of Business Conduct to more align with our mission. At Microsoft, our mission is empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So we wanted to tie complying with Standards of Business Conduct to help us as employees achieve more to further our mission. And so what we, the thing I was thinking about is how, would it be possible to get people excited about taking an annual training course, and what could we do? And just looking around, thinking about what generally people focus on. And then the other thing in thinking about just training in general, often a challenge with applying training to our real life situations are when you're taking training, you're taking training. So you know that there's probably going to be a bad actor. You can identify that person and know what to do and how to answer the questions. But we know in real life, things don't really show up that black and white. So how can we create this environment that feels realistic? And so that's really what we did. Our Standards of Business Conduct shifted from a more modular, series of courses that focus on sales or anti-corruption to what now feels like almost a Netflix mini-series. So at Microsoft, we're currently developing season 3 of our Standards of Business Conduct course. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. One thing, what I'm going to do is show you a preview for season 2. So what we did is when we did season 1, we created characters that are Microsoft employees. We thought of our values, the things that we're saying about our culture, and embedded those in the characters. These characters go through 4 episodes. It's a full story, so you can teach on the top end cultural values, growth mindset, some of the things that are important to Microsoft. And you can have the more granular content that's more specific to anti-corruption or privacy or cybersecurity, and speak to those audiences. So the idea is, since you're talking to 130,000 people around the world, to be able to talk to them and make it feel relevant to them, even when it's a very specific subject that might only apply to engineers or it might only apply to sales. Because at the top of it are our cultural messages about making the right decisions, how to make ethical choices. So I'm going to go ahead and play the preview just to give you a sense of what it looks like.
I was disappointed about the losses of my awards.
Nice to meet you. 2 minutes to Kaigura. Is that a Seahawks jersey?
Are you sure you read my book? Did you know that Microsoft is one of the most attacked companies in the world? My team started calling me Mr. Security. You know you did the right thing by speaking up. Do you think that your experience in retaliation here at Microsoft?
So, as you can see, these Azure solutions are the best way to accelerate your digital transformation agenda.
Kaigura is going to be impressed. But let's not mention it to any other partners, okay? This one partner who seems to win all the bids that he supports. The deals involve higher than usual discounts that were flagged by our analytics tools.
Did you patch everything? Did you protect the data in your source code? Is everything secure?
Wow. You really are Mr. Security now, aren't you?
So you can see that this is the way we do the Standards of Business Conduct now, and it builds all sorts of excitement. I like to say that we're tricking people into being excited about compliance. I don't think you have to trick them, but in some ways, we talked about things feeling like training. It's the response to us shifting to this model has been immense. We have employees tweet about it, and basically self-reinforce the content. The way it works is in between each episode, we have a behind-the-scenes or inside the episode. And so that's where you can ensure that the employees are picking up on the key learnings that you want them to, as well as, you explain the story. So if we keep each episode to 10 minutes or under, and then you keep the behind the scenes to 3 minutes or under, employees are, moving along in an interesting way, and it is kind of, I like to say, disguised as like a Netflix drama, because the whole deal is built on suspense. We do something at the very beginning of the episode, and really you see kind of it land on its conclusion. And so what we hear from employees, like what I hear, I can't wait for season 3, what's gonna happen in season 3. Something, you never expect to hear about compliance training. But one thing let me add. So in addition to this model for our standards of business conduct course, so since everybody takes it annually, you can build other smaller courses around the same content with the same characters. If anybody ever watches This Is Us, you can see how sometimes they'll have a whole show, and then the next one will be almost the same content from a very totally different angle. And so you can think about training that way. You can do a whole standards of business conduct training, and then you can make a smaller course just for managers that look at the same content from a manager's perspective, and you can speak to those special messages that managers need to have or take away, but the context and the content is already there because of the baseline course. And I should add that what we've done with seasons 1, 2, and 3 is we've continued them on like pretty much within 2 weeks of each other. So it's like an ongoing story. And we've been able to hit all of the topics that we want to hit in both high level and deep ways. And again, build different courses around them to zero in on specific subject. But back to Herb's statement about the forgetting curve, the fact that we've created these stories, that people are talking about them, it helps keep on people's mind. What we've heard from like our legal group are that people are asking more questions now. They're speaking up and asking if things are okay because we've shown them. You might have noticed the Seahawks suite, or at least that we had a Seahawks part. So part of that was being able to tell a travel, gifts, and hospitality story where we are hosting a government official and some things that we did wrong. But as you eased into the story, you could see how it could have happened. Because in developing the training, we talk to our actual employees and find out, of course we do studies as well to find out how these things happen. It's not often that somebody just decides, I'm gonna not comply today or gonna be unethical. It's, working too fast, all sorts of things. And I should add, somebody asked a question about integrity skills and how do we reinforce it. With this standards of business conduct course, or season 3, we reinforce all the other conduct. So we'll reinforce some learnings from integrity skills that way. I will add another important part that we can do around the course is other engagement pieces. Someone said earlier, I'm sure it was you, that it doesn't always have to feel like training. It doesn't have to be training. A lot of it is just awareness, so people know to ask questions. So in addition to our main, SBC course and the episodes and the companion courses, we have one character that people are pretty focused on, and that's Nelson, this gentleman up here. And so he's somebody who struggled in season 1 with some privacy issues. We created that character intentionally to show like a fixed mindset, someone who's fearful of speaking up, and kind of his growth. And after season 2, there was a call for, why is he still working at Microsoft? He should be fired. And some leaders were actually saying that. In fact, some leaders in my department came to me and like, you have to fire him. And I wanted them to remember it's just a character. It's not a real person. But but the thing is, paying attention to the fact that so many people cared, it's like, how can we leverage that? Low-hanging fruit. So we ran an organization-wide campaign just to see, and we called it What Should Happen to Nelson, right? We know everybody's seen it. We assume people have opinions. And so you could build in there. What I snuck in there is I called it a trivia quiz. And so again, thinking, how can we get people to voluntarily take a quiz? And let's build it, make it hard, not the easy ones that you can just click and get the right answer on. Let's make it hard, call it trivia, because then people will want to do it. And every question, we had 10 questions and there were multiple choice. Every answer was a true statement, something that we wanted to reinforce from the big course, right? So if, as they're selecting, they're reinforcing what we wanted to say about accessibility, what we wanted to say about sexual harassment, what we wanted to say about bribery and all of those things. And we had over 22,000 voluntary completions of this quiz and the vote for Nelson. I should add that we did say, you know, 100, if you got 100% on this quiz, you'd be entered to win some Surface headphones. So that might have been an incentive as well. But the thinking that you can get people engaged around compliance, ethics, integrity, without, you know, in fun and engaging ways, it's a strategy. It also is fun, but it also keeps the conversation going. So when they're talking about in the halls or water cooler or wherever, you know, again, they're self-reinforcing our content, which is something that, you know, historically hasn't necessarily happened. And
so Rochelle, if I can interrupt you, she's being very modest about this course. We were in a quarterly business review with the president of Microsoft, and we were talking about a compliance issue, a concerning issue, and how to build some more controls around it. And he said, this has been a very interesting discussion, but I just want you to know that my son called me from NYU Law School and asked me if we're going to fire Nelson or not. And he said, who the hell is Nelson? And his son wasn't a Microsoft employee, but other interns that he worked with had been talking about the course. And so it has this viral quality that's super interesting. Our president launches the Standards of Business Conduct course, and so in a very Microsoft way, people respond to him directly with feedback about the course. And he's on the board of Netflix, so this campaign started to get Netflix to put our course, you know, on their platform. And I was like, you know, I don't think it's quite that good, but
yes, it is. He thought I was being too humble. That was for, you know. But in truth, yeah, the success, I couldn't really quantify it for you in terms of, and you know, I get emails all the time. I happen to be in the behind the scenes this time. I do the, you know, explaining what's going on, and as a consequence, you know, while it was open, I was regularly getting 3 to 4 emails a day from people all over the globe thanking me, you know, and the team for making, you know, compliance something that they're interested in, you know, for doing this for the course. And, you know, it just continues. And so, you know, we're really happy with this model. I would say, though, the key takeaway is to know your workforce. You know, in spending time at Microsoft, I believe, you know, it's a crowd that wants to be challenged, you know, thus trivia and that sort of, you know, branding. But it's also, you know, a place that maybe, you know, with 130,000 employees globally, humor wouldn't necessarily work. Suspense is something universal and, you know, keeps people on the edge of the seat. And so that's where we work towards. But this is something that would work at Microsoft based on our framework. And, you know, other things might work at your organization, but the main takeaway is to, you know, spend some time thinking about it, put yourself in the chair of the learner, and think about how do you want to spend your time.
Yeah, I think one other lesson we drew was, you know, a lot of times, I think particularly in training and communications, they're sort of chasing the new thing that, you know, it's going to appeal to people, and actually just reinventing something you already have can be pretty impactful.
That's very true.
Questions?
Did you develop this in-house, or is it, I mean, in terms of like the video work and such, did you work with a vendor, and do you mind sharing with us what this effort cost?
So the idea came in-house. We worked on the storyline in-house, and then we engage a vendor to put that storyline to script and then to produce it. It's actually, you know, someone who does Hollywood, you know, not Hollywood, but, you know, Hollywood-ish. I don't know if I've not seen anything yet in Hollywood. In any event, somebody who does make movies and shows. And so, and this is someone who's worked with Microsoft for, you know, at least around 15 years doing the other types of courses. She does training. So the cost it varies, but you're looking at on average for a episode, kind of, let's say about a 45-minute sit down in total, I'd say somewhere around 500,000, give or take, depending on what bells and whistles you want or don't want. Yeah. Another, yes, and then you, yes. Yes.
So you mentioned, so these Netflix type courses, they're separate from your annual required training?
No, they are the annual, yeah.
So is the whole season then required?
Yeah, so we just call it, again, it's just creative naming. So we call it season 1, and it's really just the 4 episodes, and they come together. And so, and it's required.
Okay, well, I was gonna say, so how long do you give employees to complete, the 4 episodes?
Yeah, they have about a 2-month completion period. We usually launch right at the beginning of the fiscal, and so like 2.5 months. And so, and that's how it's always been. And then, of course, new employees take it within 45 days. And then we house them in places where, for season 2, we think for newer employees, they might want to go back and see season 1. And we have heard that they have. I should also add with these companion courses, although they're targeted to a specific group, we have people voluntarily taking those courses as well that they're not targeted to. And so in the main course, we'll pitch them, I'll leave little things hanging. If you want to know what happens to this character, watch, this companion course. If you want to know what's going to happen, watch there. So you'll leave little nuggets to drive people there because, again, the content is all meant to reinforce all of our messaging. So, anybody could take the courses. Yes. Wait, I'm sorry. This gentleman here, and then who's next?
I admire your ability to make compliance suspenseful. My question is, it looks like you struck a good balance with trying to make this an engaging initiative, and it's something that we struggle with in my firm in trying to roll out training that we do from our Office of Business Conduct and other stakeholders as well, with a concern from our executive management of not instituting any kind of training fatigue, right, and overbearing people with training. Do you encounter anything like that with this type of training initiative and all of the trainings that Microsoft may be doing? Because it seems like it's pretty extensive.
Yeah, this is extensive. Again, for our employees, the required part is the one sit down once a year, and then they might, depending on their groups, have other required training. So training fatigue, at least is from my vantage point, it's not an issue that we look at in our Office of Legal Compliance. We certainly think about it. And we try to, I shouldn't say we try to, but as Herb pointed out, we have different ways of delivering training. So you've got the workshop session. I should add, we have an anti-corruption toolkit, which is sort of this it's a toolkit that allows group discussion where in a very specific area or geo, people can talk about risks that are specific to them and then feed them back to us so we can make sure our content better aligns. So I should say that we've got voluntary options that maybe, if people are choosing it, we have less of a fatigue issue. But we try to, keep this annual.
And I just want to add too, we've done some studies with other parts of our company that also have training programs, and what we have found collectively is most of the quote fatigue isn't necessarily only attributed to time, it's what they think about the spending of that time.
Yeah.
So what we found is 3 hours in our fully immersive, what we called leading from the front, which was that sales immersive, they thought it was the best 3 to 4 hours they had ever spent learning stuff. So I think it depends on what's driving it, how you put together, how effective it is. They felt it's less intensive and take up too much time. So I think that can be a big part of that fatigue mentality too.
Yeah. I would say content matters. And I would just add another thing that we're able to do with the current format is reference other courses. And so if you want to know more about X, and we can show them where to find a 5-minute course on that particular issue. And so thinking about awareness training, again, this format allows you to just keep awareness and give employees the information, that they need when they need it and know where to find it.
So just last question, and then we'll hang around. So please come up.
Yes.
It's just language. Do you guys only provide the series in English, or do you also provide it in other languages?
We translate it into like 17 languages.
So it's subtitled, I assume?
It'll be subtitled, yes.
Well, thank you so much. And again, happy to answer any questions if you want to hang around.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.